Hello everyone and welcome to this special episode of The Night Shift. Let me start by taking you through the main headlines of the day. Chadian President Idriss Déby dies in clashes with rebels in the north of the country. A look at the media coverage of Africa as Africanews, the first Pan-African multilingual news channel, turns 5. And Saudi activist Loujain Al-Hatloui, who campaigned to end the ban on women's driving, wins top European Rights Prize. All of this plus much more. A warm welcome. I am Jerry Fisayo Bambi. Now, Africanews, the first Pan-African multilingual channel, is 5. Yes, indeed. We are letting the drums roll and the balloons float as we are indeed proud to be the sole multilingual Pan-African news media at your side. And we thank you for your support over the past 5 years when the channel launched. So, how has the journey been over 5 years? Here's a quick look at it.
It was on April 20, 2016, in the Republic of Congo, in the company of journalists and members of the technical team, that Michael Peters, CEO of Euronews, got us underway. With the most diverse newsroom on the continent and correspondents in almost all AU member states, Africanews took on its duty of telling the African story with purpose. The channel's flagship show, The Morning Call, presented simultaneously in French and English, quickly won over audiences all across Africa.
Well, hey there, everyone. I am Robert Kodingo. Welcome to The Morning Call, as we promised yesterday.
It set the news agenda with its unique perspective. To keep up to date with the news dynamics on the continent, Africanews relies on a network of dozens of correspondents.
Elles sont censées révolutionner la mobilité dans les grandes villes et lutter contre la pollution.
On peut dire qu'il s'agit d'un sujet tabou aujourd'hui puisque plus personne.
Presidents Macky Sall, Paul Kagame and Alpha Conde are some of the leaders that have exclusively spoken to Africanews.
Turning into this to the level of business.
As it turns 5, the channel has become a household name, a platform where Africa expresses itself, and a champion of the African agenda.
5 years, all together.
Sharing Pan-African stories.
Partagée à travers tout le continent.
And beyond.
Une information indépendante,
honnête et impartiale
En français.
And in English.
Merci pour tout le soutien.
Over those 5 years.
Let's keep on carrying the voices of Africa.
The voices of a rising Africa.
Parce que votre voix compte.
Because
your voice
matters.
The story there of Africanews' 5-year journey so far. We'll come back to talk more on that, but first we take a look at the latest stories across the continent up next in the African Journal.
Following the death in Basel on Tuesday of Chadian President Idriss Déby Itno, the army announced shortly afterwards via state radio the formation of a military council to replace the deceased leader, headed by his 37-year-old son Mohamed Idriss Déby Itno, a 4-star general and young lieutenant who regularly appeared alongside his father, whose close security he personally controlled as the commander of soldiers from the elite Red Beret unit, the all-powerful Presidential Guard. Army spokesperson General Azem Barmandoa Aguna stated the council immediately met and promulgated the transitional charter without providing detailed significance of this move. The barely re-elected head of state Déby was killed fighting against rebels in the north of Chad. General Idriss Déby Itno, a military powerhouse and one of Africa's longest-serving leaders, was born in 1952 into a family of herders in northeastern Chad. A young Déby joined the army in the early 70s to eventually get behind in 78, the then serving as prime minister and rebel leader Hissène Habré. Déby was instrumental in the coup that brought Habré to power in 82, distinguishing himself as a brilliant military strategist, which garnered him the position of commander-in-chief of the armed forces. The young militant with political aspirations seized power from Habre by force in the late 90s and served as interim president until he was democratically elected in 96 in the first multi-party elections in Chad's history, a position he would occupy for the next 3 decades. His re-election under controversial political circumstances would occur several times during his lifetime presidency. His administration was criticized for corruption, misuse of natural resources, and brutally repressing individual freedoms. Nevertheless, in his latter years as Chad's leader, President Idriss Déby Itno was internationally lauded for building a formidable army known as one of the most capable in Africa, indispensable in the fight against terrorism, confronting even Al-Qaeda and Boko Haram. Throughout his presidency, Déby repeatedly faced resistance in the form of coup attempts and rebel activity that ultimately saw the end of his life on the battlefield.
This housing estate was meant to function as a satellite city, part of the experiment to rid Kinshasa, Congo's capital, of congestion and urban chaos. Touted as the Dubai of Kinshasa, the Cité du Fleuve promised to deliver high-quality housing and some of the most modern social amenities in Africa. But the few finished houses quickly began taking in water, to the dismay of occupants who had to part with huge sums of money to buy the apartments. Today, the situation of the inhabitants is deteriorating. For example, in the Cité du Fleuve, where the rent was $2,500 a month 2 or 3 years ago, today it is less than $1,000. When the Congo River surges, the houses become damp and cold, and with the humidity, the wall and ceiling paint is peeling off. I bought a flat for $185,000 in November 2018. Which should have been delivered to me 3 months later, that is to say, on February 1st, 2019. To this day, it hasn't yet been delivered. The project has been hit by severe delays and there is massive disillusionment. The French company which owns the estate said it had suffered losses and accused senior Congolese government officials of frustrating the project. I still believe that this is a good project and that all the authorities involved are on board, including us, the Union Committee, so we are determined to see our rights through to the end. The Cité du Fleuve was planned to be built on 25 square kilometers of land reclaimed from the Congo River. For now, it remains a dream taking in water.
Now that the COVID-19 pandemic has affected lives and disrupted nearly everything around us is not news. COVID-19 infections and deaths in Africa, however, ranks the lowest in the world. One country, though, with most infections in Africa is South Africa. Yet the government's efforts to tackle the pandemic has been described by some as ruthless and effective. We have with us Phumla Williams, South Africa's government spokesperson, to shed some light on the current situation. Phumla, good to have you with us.
I'm feeling very honored to be invited by yourselves, particularly as you broadcast to the continent, which is where we have an interest in.
And we are glad to have you with us. To begin with, what's the status of the current work being done by South African scientists in battling the local variant of the coronavirus?
I think when this virus descended in South Africa almost a year ago, from day one, our scientists have been on the lead in making sure that we start tracking the virus. And I'm sure you would be aware that one of the discoveries of the unique virus found in South Africa was found by the scientists in South Africa in the course of doing their duties. And one of the second things that we would like to celebrate as the continent is that our scientists have been able to harvest this virus because they've been able to generate the virus in the lab and share it with all the scientists globally. Today, we are at a point where we have experienced the challenges of getting a vaccine, and it has been a struggle for the poor countries and the developing countries to procure for their respective countries. And the leadership led by our president has given the scientists the mandate to say, yes, go back to the drawing board. Yes, I'm happy with your surveillance. I'm happy with the advice that you continue to give us. And our scientists, as we speak now, they are hard at work doing exactly that work that has been challenged by the president.
Interesting. Now, where do you see South Africa in the next 5 years? Will life return to normalcy in South Africa and on the continent after the pandemic?
The life will never be the same again, but I think what it has done, it has also, going forward, has challenged the continent that until we begin to have our own, we will always be the last in the queue. And that's what we are striving for. We have learned to be responsible, because for me, I don't think this miracle that we have achieved of, surviving, it's, yes, government did some bit, but South Africans also did their bit. You don't struggle to see every second person wearing a mask. And there hasn't been too much persuasion. It's because people have realized that this pandemic is real and it does kill, and people have lost their relatives. And as a result, they are all doing their part.
What is your message to Africa? What is your message to the African, to the government, and to the continent as a whole?
We have to challenge ourselves that instead of my first protocol being in Europe to sell my product, my first protocol should be, let me go and see whether the DRC can actually buy something from me. And I think if we can begin to have that culture, most of people will say, my holiday, my dream holiday is always in Europe. Nobody ever thinks, my dream holiday is to go to Ethiopia. And imagine if we can begin to think like that, and not that there's anything wrong with Europe or America or anything, but I think we need to begin to appreciate ourselves. There should be nothing wrong in me saying I'm going on holiday and I'm going to Kenya. And there should be nothing wrong in a Kenyan who says, I would like to come and pay a visit in South Africa. And in South Africa, we're working very hard to deal with some of the challenges that we have, because we believe we can encourage our brothers and sisters to visit. We can encourage business people in the continent from coming to see with us, because that's how we begin to demystify this myth about each other.
Thank you, Phumla, for speaking with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting us.
If you are just joining us, you are watching The Night Shift here on African News. I am Jerry Fisayo Bambi. Now we take a look at some stories making headlines outside of Africa.
The last 10 years have been the warmest decade since the 1850s. This worrying assessment comes from the United Nations World Meteorological Organization, which says time is fast running out to tackle the climate crisis. Their major UN report says greenhouse gas concentrations have increased despite the pandemic.
2020 was 1.2 degrees Celsius hotter than pre-industrial times. We are getting dangerously close to the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit that was set by the scientific community. We are on the verge of the abyss.
This call comes days before US President Joe Biden's climate summit on Thursday. 40 world leaders have been invited to the virtual talks. US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry met with China's Vice Premier on Monday, saying they're willing to work with China to speed up the Paris Agreement. John Kerry also met with leaders of South Korea this weekend for closed-door meetings in order to galvanize efforts to tackle the climate change crisis.
Ladies and gentlemen,
the Council of Europe has awarded the 2020 Václav Havel Human Rights Prize to Loujain Al-Hathloul. The Saudi activist pushed to end a ban on women driving in the Conservative Kingdom, but was arrested in 2018 and sentenced to prison on terrorism charges. Her sister accepted the award on her behalf.
Lujane cannot be present because although she has been released from prison, she's still silenced inside of the country. My sister Lujane spent 1,001 days in prison. Her crime? Fighting for women's rights in Saudi Arabia. Lujane sacrificed herself to fight for a better life for Saudi women. She campaigned for our right to drive, to protect abused women, and to end the male guardianship system. Because of her activism, Lujane was kidnapped, deprived of finishing her studies, illegally imprisoned, brutally tortured, put in solitary confinement for months, and now sentenced as a terrorist.
Al Haflul was among an all-female lineup of prize finalists. A group of Buddhist nuns promoting gender equality in the Himalayas and human rights activist Julian Losenge from the Democratic Republic of Congo were runners-up.
I spoke earlier in an interview to Nigerian musician Femi Kuti, a legend in his own right and the eldest son of the legendary Afrobeat musician Fela. Femi told me, amongst other things, why he thinks Afrobeat will continue to make waves. Let's now see that interview. It is interesting to note that we are having this interview on the back heel of a major recognition for Afrobeat, with the Grammy Award win for another Nigerian artist, Burna Boy, who pretty much has been influenced by your father, Fela, and indeed by your music as well. Tell us, how does that make you feel?
First of all, a big congratulations to him. And I think Wizkid was nominated, won an award too with Beyonce. So it's, I mean, anything like this is always great for Africa. The only unfortunate thing is, I don't think we should always wait for the outside world to tell us we have talent before we recognize our talent. So, but in the light of that, it's still, we're making progress, slowly but surely.
Lovely. And you yourself have bagged multiple Grammy nominations in the past and have done so much pushing the boundaries of Afrobeat across the world. Unfortunately, we are in the middle...
Sorry, just a correction. Sorry, correction. Afrobeat is very different from the Afrobeat now. So we have to always differentiate this. So I play Afrobeat. There is no S. The others play Afrobeat, has an S.
Wow, fantastic. And it's good that you point out this correction because so much is happening and everyone just says Afrobeats, Afrobeats. Could you tell us what's the difference though?
The difference is Fela created the Afrobeat, and it's the way his harmonization, the beats, then of course the political message behind it, which is probably secondary, but the whole arrangement of the musical format of the Afrobeat is very different. What the Afrobeat does is more, it's more like hip-hop oriented, but they take some beats from the Afrobeat, which distinguishes it from the hip-hop or pop world to make it more African. So this is the difference. So it's more like commercial oriented music.
Where do you see it in the next 5 years?
I think the Afrobeat will always inspire. Don't forget, when my father created the Afrobeat, I don't think he even recognized how influential his music was. Even the great Miles Davis came back. My father was a great fan of Miles Davis. Miles Davis influenced my father a lot. And in the autobiography of Miles Davis, he said my father's music would be one of the forefronts in the music one day. I mean, practically at least 90% of the musical industry have been influenced by his work. I think this will always be the case, so it will always grow. The Afrobeats now is like modernized African disco format of partying sound. I think this is becoming very big as well. You see, Africa will always contribute positively in this respect, in sports, in music, in film, and because we are a very resilient people.
Femi, you have something new up in your shelves. Could you tell us about it?
Yes, they work with my eldest son, Madi, and it's called Legacy Plus. And this is a joint album, but without interference in the collaborations of the album. This is probably my best work in terms of emotions and where I'm at in my life right now. It's so important because my eldest son's work, where he plays all the instruments on the album. And so what I see is he has found a universe in the Afrobeat. My father found this universe, I explored it, found one, he has explored it, and he has found his own footing immediately. So it's a brilliant work by him. I'm so proud. I'm really overwhelmed at his progress as a musician.
We have to go, but just leave us with a parting message to the generation of young Africans who have been inspired by Afrobeats and Afrobeats.
I will not just leave it for music. Africa can be the envy of the world. We should not let negativity divide us, and we should all think. We should bring back Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Patrice Lumumba. Africa must be united. We must put our differences apart. We must think with one mind, and build Africa. Africa, look, we have everything in Africa. We don't always have to look up to Europe and America for advice or whatever. We civilize this world. We should go back, research our history, medicine, and put Africa back positively on the world map.
And it's on that note that we draw the curtain on this special episode of The Late Show. I am Jerry Fisayo Bambi, assuring you Africanews would continue to carry your voice in Africa and around the world with independence and impartiality. I'll leave you with a no comment, and I'll see you some other time. Have a good evening.